I'm delighted to welcome all of you here for this very special event, which is our kickoff of the new year. We have a really busy year already scheduled for this year at the Pacific Council, and more events keep getting penciled in as speakers and events become available. So I hope you'll all watch your emails and watch the website. We have an exciting new website. But we're especially honored tonight to have with us Mrs. Mary Robinson, a very special friend. She's going to be with us for a wide-ranging interview and discussion session. And all of you will be able to think of questions that you'd like to ask at the end. I hope we're going to have time for that. But I'm personally proud to salute Mrs. Robinson for her extraordinary career, especially in the field of international human rights and humanitarian work, and now in global environmental work. On behalf of the Pacific Council, I want to say a very, very special thank you to the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation for co-sponsoring and partnering with us in the evening tonight, and for representing the Hilton Foundation with so many of your wonderful staff, people, and members. Thank you so much. We're really appreciative of your support, and I hope it's something we can continue in the future. Our thanks also to this evening's sponsors: Los Angeles County Supervisor Michael Antonovich, Susan F. Rice, and to the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. All of you have helped to make this evening such a great success. Thank you so much. But before we begin, the Pacific Council would like to pay a special tribute to one of our own. This is a really warm part of the program for me especially. Please welcome onto the stage Mark Nathanson and Bob Tuttle, co-chairs of the Pacific Council.
I'm not either of them.
I promised to be brief, but we couldn't let this go by without honoring our former co-chair, Ambassador Cantor. It's been a great privilege for me to serve along with Mickey for the last 3 years. It's lucky not only to have an ambassador on here as a co-chair, but to have a former secretary, and Mickey's been fabulous. And because of Mickey, our reputation has grown, we've improved as an organization. I just can't tell you how much he's contributed. But I'll try to tell you just a little bit. Because of Mickey, we initiated and completed a strategic plan for the future. We have improved our public relations, which when I first was asked about this job, I went to see Mickey and his lovely wife Heidi, and they said, "You're weak in public relations." And we've really tried to improve that, and Mickey's been fantastic.
It made me retire.
We've improved ourselves technologically, not something I had anything to do with. As you can tell, I can't even talk about the word. And we were under Mickey's leadership, we celebrated our 20th anniversary, and we've had a number of, in the last 3 years, stunning events. And I think they were captured by the 2 galas we had. Each one raised over $1 million. And at our first gala, our honored speaker and guest was Secretary Clinton. That was all due to Mickey. So, Mickey, because of you, we are a better and stronger organization. And it's impossible to really thank you, but we thought we would at least try. And we have a little booklet, a leather-bound booklet that memorializes all the pictures that when you were involved with the council. So please join me in a hand to Mickey.
If I had known I was so wonderful, I would have asked to be paid. I guess timing is everything, right? Just a couple of things. One, to Jerry Green and Jennifer Faust, this organization, I think you two would agree with me, would not run without you two. and the great success is in large measure due to both of you. So thank you both, Jennifer and I met Mark Nathanson, who's going to replace me, and let me say it's a low bar, Mark, very low bar. He's going to replace me. I first met him 43 years ago, literally this month, and it's been a great friendship. I couldn't be more honored that you would be following me. You'll do a much better job. We'll be much better off with you in the leadership, and I just want to follow you, that's all. Bob Tuttle and I share many things. First of all, he's married to Maria Hummer Tuttle, who is my law partner, my favorite law partner of all time, and so therefore he has good taste. That's number one. Number two, he's a wonderful man to work with. If you ever want to work with someone who is always cooperative, who always is looking to make things happen and can do them, it's Bob Tuttle. So thank you both for what you're doing. I look forward to following you and being helpful as I can be. And thank you all for being such a part of the Pacific Council.
I hope you'll all enjoy your dinner now. When dessert is served, we'll begin the program with Mrs. Mary Robinson.
My name is Jerry Green, and I work at the Pacific Council, and we're really pleased that so many of our members and guests could join us. I want to welcome a special group of guests, which is a number of the consuls general who serve in Los Angeles are joining us this evening. And LA, for those of you who don't know, has the largest numbers of consulates in the United States with the exception of New York, and that's just because of the UN. So LA is certainly on the radar of major capitals around the world. I also want to thank our friends from the Hilton Foundation. I want to mention a couple of names just because we have people with whom we deal a lot who we think of. They're Pacific Council members and good sources of counsel and advice and good friends. Ed Kane, who is with us this evening. Dr. Shaheen Kasim Laha is here this evening, and Judy Miller. So thank you all for being such Pacific Council supporters. It really takes me great pleasure to introduce the new chairman and president of the Hilton Foundation, and specifically to invite him and to welcome him and his wife Marie to Los Angeles. We're the international relations or international affairs community here is robust, but no one has ever accused it of being too big. And I was, as you'll see from his bio. The new head of the Hilton Foundation is a seasoned expert on Africa, and I introduced him to Nancy Ossie from the International Medical Corps, and I say LA's heft in Africa has just doubled. So we now have two seasoned experts in Los Angeles rather than one. I want to introduce formally Dr. Peter Lauren, who has just joined the Hilton Foundation. He's replaced Steve Hilton, who's chairman of the board. And by the way, a shout out for Steve Hilton, who has done extraordinary things with the Hilton Foundation and done remarkable good around the world. I would actually encourage you to visit the Hilton Foundation building in Agora Hills, which is coincidentally where I live, which is in and of itself remarkable. It is a green building, a beautiful site, and it's a remarkable organization. And yet again, it's something that's in Los Angeles that's frequently better known around the world than in our own community. So the Hilton Foundation is really a remarkable asset to the people of Southern California. Dr. Lauren has a significant experience all around the world. From 2008 to 2014, he was executive director of the Firelight Foundation, which identifies and supports African nonprofits serving children and families in the areas of education, resilience, and health. He served for 6 years as the executive director of the Bernard Van Leer Foundation in the Netherlands, which provides opportunities to socially and economically disadvantaged children. And then finally, he began his career at Save the Children, serving in different roles in over 11 years, including spending 8 years in Mali. 8 years in Mali. This really signals to me, I'm a political scientist, so I do field work, but for me, the the lobby of the Nile Hilton where I interview sleazy politicians, I'm going to get lung cancer from all the cigarette smoke. Mali is a different order of field work, and 8 years in Mali is quite remarkable. And he also served as a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Morocco. And incidentally, we will be having the head of the Peace Corps address the Pacific Council in February. Jennifer Faust, the person who really makes all the magic happen, is a Peace Corps volunteer, former Peace Corps. And if you want something done right, call on the Peace Corps, which, by the way, costs less than a couple of F-16s. Peter holds degrees from Stanford and Georgetown, PhD from the University of London, and I'm just so thrilled to welcome him and Marie to our international affairs family here in Los Angeles. It's always a treat to have new people to talk to, so we're going to work hard to make your time here productive. So I want to welcome you and turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry, for that memorable introduction. And thank you also to the Pacific Council for working to host this event with us at the Hilton Foundation. Tonight is, as you all know, a wonderful opportunity to hear from a world leader who's one of the most dedicated and inspiring human rights advocates of our time. We'll be able to talk to her about her public roles and accomplishments and get her take on humanitarian crises, gender equality, climate change for sure, and conflict in the Middle East and North Africa and beyond. So let me take a moment just to introduce Mary Robinson. As you know, Mary Robinson was the first woman president of Ireland from 1990 to 1997. After that, she was the UN Commissioner for Human Rights and the founder and president of Realizing Rights, the Ethical Globalization Initiative. Between March 2013 and August 2014, Mary Robinson was the UN Special Envoy to the Great Lakes region in Africa, where Marie comes from, a very troubled and high potential region. And then in August 2014, she was tapped to become the United Nations Special Envoy on climate change. She currently serves as the president of the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice, and you'll hear, I think, the distinction today between the ideas of climate change and climate justice. And she has spent her career as an advocate for social change in roles as academic, legislator, and barrister. She's a recipient of numerous awards and honors from around the world, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama. She's a member of the Elders, former chair of the Council of Women World Leaders, and a member of the Club of Madrid. Now, interviewing Mary Robinson this evening is Mark Nathanson, whom you saw earlier on stage, the co-chair of the Pacific Council Board of Directors. Mark served in both the Clinton and Bush administrations as chairman. He's also vice chair of the National Democratic Institute and serves as a trustee on the Aspen Institute, the USC Center for the Digital Future, and the LA Coalition for Economy and Jobs. So it's my great pleasure now to welcome both Mary Robinson and Mark Nathanson to the stage.
Well, we're in for a very special chat. We call it a fireside chat today. And we at the Pacific Council are looking forward to hearing your views about all the subjects that Peter said. But before we begin on some of those topics, which we certainly will, I thought it would be great for the audience and all of us here in Los Angeles to know more about you and your background. And so I have a few questions just to start up to give us a little feel about Mary Teresa Winfield Burke Robinson. Born in Ballina, the county Mayo.
Ballina.
Balanas, already mispronounced it. The daughter of two prominent physicians, doctors. I wanted to ask you, just to start off, were you a rebel? Why didn't you become a physician like your mother and father? Instead, you chose the law. And I might say at this time in Ireland, women were considered second-class citizens. So I'd like your little view about how you went into the law.
Okay, I'm very happy to do that. I would like to begin, though, by thanking both the Pacific Council and the Conrad Hilton Foundation for the opportunity to be here and to have this talk and discussion, and in particular, because we were really worried about this, in particular, for not having rain here in California. I mean, I know you want rain, but we didn't want to come here from Ireland and get rain in Los Angeles, so thank you for that. I was lucky growing up. First of all, I had a very early interest in human rights and gender equality and using my elbows because I was wedged between 4 brothers. Wow. And you have to assert yourself when you've got these 4 brothers, sure. 2 older than me and 2 younger. But I was very lucky that both my parents instilled in me something that was very unusual in Ireland at that time, that I was equally capable and able and had the potential of my brothers. And it was so unusual because the fact is that the Constitution said that the place of the woman was in the home. There was a real sort of Catholic ethos that you either got married or became a nun. And if you were artistic and talented enough, you might become a writer or an artist. But that was a kind of breakaway that some very talented women managed to do. My choice was to become a nun because I didn't want to get married, not at the age of 18 or whatever. And my parents were very proud of the fact that I wanted to be a nun and sent me to Paris for a year. And of course, that changed everything. But quite seriously, I am so grateful to my parents that they gave me that confidence, that I could do anything that my brothers could do, that men could do, and I think it really was a wonderful gift, really, of confidence in yourself, belief in yourself.
Very important for your parents to give that. Well, as you grew up and had studied at Catholic schools, and come from a family on your mother's side that goes back to the 13th century as active Catholics and distinguished people, judges, politicians, and relatives who were nuns as well. But you married a Protestant. And I understand your parents didn't come to the wedding. Tell us about your wonderful husband who is here in the audience. How was that decision for the family at that time?
Well, let's work backwards. You remember, we're probably going to talk later about the Paris Agreement on the 12th of December last. It was also our 45th wedding anniversary.
Here,
so
here.
I think I made the right decision. It was a mix of things. When I was elected as a senator in Ireland at the age of 25, and I was also a Reed Professor of Law. So I was a professor and a senator. And my parents thought I was the biggest success they'd ever known, and no one was good enough for me. That's frank. And certainly it would help if he was a Catholic, professional, and Nick was a cartoonist. I mean, come on, a Protestant and a cartoonist. What hope? But I think we're a very compatible couple, and we've had a great life. And when I was president, he told me, but it's a truth, that when you are a head of state, no one tells you you're speaking too long. I mean, you're all very good not to be there listening to the State of the Union address this evening. But the truth is, presidents can go on, and nobody will tell them. But Nick had a cough. And when Nick coughed, I knew that I had spoken for too long.
It worked.
It worked.
Let me ask you a little bit about you and your views of Catholicism, because when you were a senator, at a very early age, you made a quite remarkable speech in 1977, I believe it was. No, 1969, I believe it was.
67.
67. And you questioned publicly the church's doctrine on divorce, contraception, and homosexuality. And you were criticized in the press and so forth. But looking today at the church, at the modern church, and Pope Francis, do you think progress is being made? Is enough progress being made?
Well, I certainly do like the way that Pope Francis is very reflective. Who am I to judge? And very much focusing on mercy, on a quality that is very gentle in a way. I think he's trying to change the church into a pastoral church. And if you look at Christ's teaching, that was a very pastoral type of teaching. I loved the fact, I can't tell you my admiration for Pope Francis for one reason in particular. When he came here to the United States, and he was in Washington and he was in New York, that he could persuade the Secret Service that he was going to be driving in this little car. I was, a head of state coming to the United States, and I can tell you the Secret Service controlled you, and they told you what to do, and they told you how to do it. And the fact that the Pope could do that was to me an enormous symbol of his moral authority.
Well, let's turn to one of the many problems we have on the planet, and that is in 2015, more than 1 million refugees have reached Europe, the largest amount of refugees since World War II. The crisis has tested European unity and threatened the vision of a borderless continent. Nearly 3,800 are estimated to have drowned of refugees from Syria and other places in the Mediterranean. Are the leaders of Europe, America, doing enough about the migrant situation? Some people have said we shouldn't take in Muslim migrants. They should go to Sunni or Shiite countries. Tell us about the migrant situation and your views of what should be done.
I knew I'd get some easy questions. Actually, this is an issue that is being addressed by an Irishman who's a good friend of Mickey Cantor's, Peter Sutherland. And he's the special representative of Ban Ki-moon, and he was of Kofi Annan before that, on migration. And he makes the point, which is a very, very good point. Accepting in Europe 1 million refugees mostly refugees, in 2014, 2015, is not a big issue, in fact, because we're a community of 518 million. So if we can't accept 1 million, when Lebanon is accepting more than that, when Turkey is accepting a lot more than that, when Jordan is accepting, these are countries that really are extended because they are the near neighbors of Syria. And we need to manage this issue in a way that is fair. And we need to do it between the member states of the European Union. But so far, that hasn't worked very well. And it is a big crisis for the European Union. I would admit that. I'm a fan of the European Union. I hope that Britain will stay in the European Union. But I have to say, we're lacking leadership, except for Angela Merkel. And she is now suffering quite a bit of political criticism. She has a lot of political capital, and she's spending it on this issue. And she's right to do it. And she hasn't backed down on the issue. Because not only will we have maybe the same again, another million in 2016, but we will have more because of the driver of climate change. Climate change doesn't cause 100% any of these problems, but it aggravates all of them. So we will have more migrants, and one of the ways in which it's aggravating the situation is we're very close to Africa in Europe, and the population of Africa will double by 2050, double. But the capacity of Africa to feed itself will be diminished by climate change. So some of them will go south to South Africa, but a lot of them will try to get to Europe. And so they should. because I come from a country that had its famine in the 19th century, and this country welcomed us. Not welcomed us easily. There were a lot of Irish people with a lot of problems. We came with all the risks of being maybe unpopular in localities, and we helped to build a lot of this country. And I'm very proud of our record in doing that. That's not true anymore. We have a globalization, which is a globalization of services and capital and goods, but not people.
Well, what do you think? I know that as a former president and a politician, the politicians sometimes say things they don't always mean. You were known to be a very honest politician and said whatever you thought was right. What do you think of Donald Trump and his comment that we shouldn't take any Muslims in this country?
Yeah. Well, we need to manage migration intelligently. Intelligently. Intelligently.
I think that says enough. I think that says enough. Let's move on to climate. You recently returned from Paris. You were quoted in The Guardian as saying, "Climate change is affecting the most vulnerable people around the world, and they are not the cause of it. This is at the heart of the future for all women, for all people." Why don't we understand more about climate and the seriousness that it's doing to our planet?
Well, thank you for this question, because this really plays to what I passionately believe in, which is the injustice of climate change. There's an incredible injustice when the communities most affected in this country and in the rest of the world are the poorest communities who contribute least. In most of the developing world, the communities most affected don't have cars, don't have central heating, don't have fridges, don't have any of the means of emissions. And yet they are the ones that are seeing everything changing. I mean, I remember Constance O'Kellett, who lives in northern Uganda in a village and has become a friend, talking about it. And she said, when we were growing up, we were poor, but we had enough to eat because it was predictable. We sowed and we harvested and we had our food. From about the year 2000, things changed very dramatically for the worse. And in that part of Uganda, you have long periods of drought now, and drought you understand in this area, long periods of drought, and then flash flooding, and then more drought. And the school has been destroyed, so she formed a women's group, and then Oxfam found her, and I was president of Oxfam, and that's how we became friends. And she said to me something that stayed with me when I first met her. She said, "And you know, Mary, we thought God was punishing us. And then through Oxfam, I learned it was the lives of rich people." Full stop. You know, so human activity is causing the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the warming, but it's not being done by those most affected, including even here in the United States, in Alaska. I've met some very fine Inuit women from Alaska, and they are having to move, their livelihoods are being undermined. I'm glad that President Obama went there, because we need to know that these are the real stories of what's happening in our world. And climate justice is really having a people-centered approach. It's saying we need to link human rights, development, and climate change and put the focus on how is it affecting people. And I am not somebody who thought of this 30 years ago and who's been living with this in a very knowledgeable way. No. When I was serving as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, I didn't make a single speech about climate change. I did bring together environmental leaders and human rights leaders, but it was really to make that nexus between human rights and environment, and we didn't have any sense of the impact of climate change. It was afterwards when I was a bit frustrated in my time as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights that we didn't have a really fully shared understanding of human rights. In the United States in particular, but also in most of the developed world, human rights is civil liberties, basically. But for most of the world, human rights is also rights to food and safe water and health and education and shelter. These are fundamental rights, and Eleanor Roosevelt understood that. And she fought the State Department at the time, which is very interesting, to make sure that in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, those rights were included. And that's why it is the Universal Declaration. And that's why the world shares it, and every country has adopted it as a sort of declaratory framework. Working on economic and social rights, you become really very, it becomes very clear how they are being undermined worldwide for very poor communities. And, you know, that's a big challenge to us because we also need to prioritize those people who are affected and get them access to something that is extraordinarily important to how they come out of poverty, which is energy. And I'll go on a little bit on this because it's obviously my passion. I could talk forever about it, but I won't. When we had the Millennium Development Goals, the 8 goals that were for developing countries, we made a big mistake, and we didn't include energy, even dirty energy, even fossil fuel energy, because it is the way in which people bring themselves out of poverty. And we talk about health and equality and tackling, you know, poverty, etc., but we didn't talk about energy. It is in the Sustainable Development Goals, and it obviously is very key to the Paris Climate Agreement. And we have 1.3 billion people in our world of 7.2, 7.3 billion. So it's a big proportion who never switch that switch, who have no access to electricity. And we can tackle that now in a way that we've never been able to before, because we have the gadgets, we have the lights, we have the panels, and we have the method of payment, which is the mobile phone with its tiny amounts. 2.7 billion of our world of 7.2, 7.3 billion. Imagine that proportion still cook on open fires in the 21st century. The inequality in our world is unbelievable.
1 billion people don't have access to fresh water.
Yes, you could water, sanitation even more.
Yeah.
I mean, when you count up, so we have these gross inequities, but all of them have to do with energy. We'll get water and sanitation, pumps, etc., when we get energy. Right. And that's the biggest challenge. It's a wonderful challenge. We have an opportunity to make the world a lot fairer and to really tackle poverty by addressing, I would call it, and I don't like the expression, but we all use it, low-hanging fruit. We can actually change the lives of millions of people in our world today now, because we have the means of doing it.
Well, tell us about the Mary Robinson Foundation Climate Justice. What is climate justice and what role does it play in this climate discussion?
Climate justice just starts with the injustice and says we need to be very people-centered in our approach to climate change because we've made mistakes in the past in climate action. For example, in this country, turning corn into ethanol drove up food prices and was an unforeseen consequence. It was not a good idea in the first place. Big dams can displace people who don't have proper land rights. So we've made a lot of mistakes because we haven't put people at the center and their rights. And the gender dimensions of climate are huge.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, if you undermine very poor livelihoods, who has to put food on the table? The mother. She has to go further for the firewood, she has to work harder, she has to become more resilient. And what we've done in my foundation, since you asked about the work we're doing, one of the things we did, we took advantage of the fact that although the climate world is still largely, though not exclusively, women are becoming more important in the climate world, but still it's ministers for environment, ministers of energy, and scientists. So it's still a pretty male world. But there were 3 women who presided over the conferences. Connie Hedegaard in Copenhagen at the beginning, and then she became the climate envoy of the climate commissioner of the European Union. Patricia Espinosa in the following COP in Mexico, and then we were about to have in South Africa another woman, Mighty Mashaban. So in Copenhagen, we persuaded those 3 women coming together to form a Troika Plus of women leaders on climate change, with a commitment to link with women at grassroots. That was the real commitment, to listen to women who would know what the problems were. I didn't realize when we formed that Troika Plus how unpopular the word Troika would be in my country because of other reasons, but we won't go into that. You know, I had to live with, I tried to get them to change the Troika. No, we like this. No other group of women is called the Troika Plus women leaders, and we know why, etc. And we actually plotted in Durban with our then president of the COP, Mighty Mashaban, that we would get gender onto the agenda of the climate conference, and that we would have a commitment to gender equality, to gender balance in all delegations, etc. And we came to Doha, in Qatar, where there was a male president presiding, the then minister for the environment, and we kind of cornered him and made him enthusiastic about the idea. And then I discovered that there was a problem, one of these technical legal problems that were discovered by a lawyer in the European Commission office, because the European Union was going to propose this on behalf of this troika of women, because we weren't, most of the ministers were negotiators, but the troika itself was just a leadership group of these women. And this lawyer said, unfortunately, in the rules, you cannot really propose a new decision and get it adopted at the same COP. And Christiana Figueres called me into her office. She's the executive secretary of the UNFCCC project. She said, Mary, it's almost impossible, I'm afraid. It really is. And I said, define almost. And she said, well, actually, if the chair of the COP was to see on the floor that there were so many people who wanted this, he could uniquely decide that he would refer it for negotiation. And that's what we had to do. And we had a wonderful, very emotional thing of various delegations. The United States was on board, Grenada was on board, Mexico was on board, South Africa was on board. They all, and everybody, Japan, the European Union, obviously, and it was really very significant. And then this man who was the president of the COP sort of threw up his arms. It was drama. And he said, what can I do, a mere man? And he looked down at the phrase that Christiana Figueres had prepared for him, and that was to refer it for negotiation. And then it was negotiated and it was adopted, this decision, in Doha, and it became the Doha Miracle. And it was because women were able to organize as ministers of their government, but also as negotiators, that they would, in South Africa looked after the African delegation, Mexico looked after Latin America. You know, we had women all over the place, and it was a real power play, and we did it, which was kind of satisfying.
Well, it's interesting because President Obama awarded you the Medal of Freedom, Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2009, and he called you a crusader for women and those without a voice in Ireland and throughout the world. But now, 7-8 years later, there's still 43 million women who can't get education in their countries. What can we do about it?
Well, I think it is a very big challenge, and we need to now take forward the Sustainable Development Goals, which are for all countries. That's a good difference, because there is a very strong goal, Goal 5, on gender equality and on women's empowerment in all countries. And you haven't yet had a woman president in this country. We've had 2 in Ireland. But we need in every country to understand the importance of gender equality and diversity and the richness of it and the value of it. And we have the opportunity with the Sustainable Development Goals. I was saying this morning, rather provocatively in UCLA, why have we not felt that difference on the 1st of January of this year, 1st of January 2016? And the students kind of looked at me, and I said, you know, we are, after all, in a new era of sustainable development. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, the 2030 agenda. So by 2030, we have to achieve this agenda for all countries. And we have the Paris Agreement, which is extraordinarily challenging because it defined again our target. And I say it in European terms because I'm not quite sure of the Fahrenheit equivalent. I think it's 3.6 degrees, but let me say it in European terms. We have to be, the text is well below 2 degrees and working towards 1.5 degrees. That's never been said explicitly as well before. And that was because Paris, the 195 countries, listened to the stories they were hearing of those countries that are desperate. The Marshall Islands, Kiribati, the Philippines, Bangladesh, that for them, anything above 1.5 is horror story. They probably will have to leave their country or leave parts of their country because it'll go underwater. And that came across, and the Paris Agreement was for me an example, a rare example of humanity and solidarity. It wasn't a strong agreement. It isn't a very enforceable agreement. There's lots we have to do about it. Many NGOs have criticized it, and rightly. But fundamentally, it was the fairest agreement that the world could give in the circumstances. And the United States played a very big role in that. And it really was extraordinary. If anybody had told me 6 months before Paris, we would get a separate article on loss and damage, we would get that commitment to well below 2 degrees and working towards 1.5, and we would get the long-term goal in there of carbon neutrality by the end of the century, which is in there. This meant that countries had been listened to, and we're in a new era because we also know what countries have committed to before Paris, because the French insisted that we had to have these intended commitments of countries, intended nationally determined contributions. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? You know, the UN goes in for these things. But what it means is these intended nationally determined contributions, which 189 countries signed up to and said what they would do as their intended commitments, have to become formal nationally determined commitments by 2020. And they have to be more ambitious, because when the UN added up these 189 intended nationally determined contributions, they said this leads us to a goal of about 2.7 or up to 3.5 degrees of warming. And that is catastrophic.
Yeah.
Catastrophic. So we're on a catastrophic course, but at least we're on a realistic course. We know where we're going now. We have to be able to be much more ambitious.
Well,
and we can be.
I'm on a catastrophic course if I don't turn it over to Q&A, because the audience here has many questions. We could go on, but let's hear what the audience here is interested in. And if you just show your hands, let's start over here. Yes, sir.
A lot of people, it's not maybe popular to go after the agriculture sector, but maybe something that we need to focus more on. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Agriculture.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. It's a question that my country is troubled by, because we're trying to grow our agriculture. And we have exactly this kind of issue. If you grow your agriculture, especially if it's beef agriculture, you're growing your emissions. And how do you square that? And we're trying to say, well, the world needs food, so we're trying to provide the food. And it's not really an adequate answer. I think we do need to do what you're saying. Funnily enough, I have said a few times in meetings like this that we need to reduce perhaps the meat that we're eating, and nobody pays any attention. But when Governor Schwarzenegger said it in Paris, that we need to eat less meat, wow, that had an impact. You know, that really had an impact. And he said it in a Schwarzenegger way that I can't even begin to emulate. And it is part of the issue. We need to be smarter about our agriculture. We need to be smarter about so many things. And we need to understand that it takes so much water to produce beef, etc. And we're going to have a water-stressed world. You have it here in Los Angeles. We're going to have it globally in countries that really will suffer greatly from water stress. So at the same time, I want to make the point, we don't have to be miserable about this new world. We can be very excited about it. because it's a world that can be fairer for a start if we get clean energy to those large numbers of people. I mean, think of it. The numbers of people in our world today who don't have access to electricity. And I was speaking at the International Energy Agency in October, and I told them a story about Paris, about the exposition in Paris in 1878, I think it was, where the Eiffel Tower was built. I hope I'm right in my year, but it was that kind of time. And there was an exposition about electricity. And Thomas Edison was the star turn because he had come with his light bulb. And they had light bulbs all up the Avenue de l'Opéra and the Place de l'Opéra. And at a certain point, the switch was switched, and Paris had electricity. And at that same exposition, there was a Frenchman, André, I think it was his name, Mouchot, I'm sure of the Mouchot, and he had a solar engineering idea, and he got a gold medal at that exposition. But France decided that coal was the way to go, and coal was cheap, and they had no idea of the dangers. And that's the way it went. But even then, the solar potential was there. They just missed it because they didn't know what we know now. I mean, think about it. If they had gone solar completely at that stage, what a world we might have that would be much better for our children. So it's that exciting world that we're into. And I gather that solar in this country is providing more jobs now than coal and the fossil fuel industry generally, because it's becoming cheaper, because it's becoming more popular, etc. We're nearly there in the public imagination of the move we need to make. And the more we can contribute to making that an exciting new world of the new climate economy that is a clean economy and that has more jobs and more, the better for everybody, particularly every child born today. Children born in this part of the world will live to be 100 plus. They will know the full cycle of whether we've got it right, and what will they say about us? You know, I mean, I think, I worry because I have 5 grandchildren who'll be in their 40s in Nick and myself have 5 grandchildren who will be in their...
Jane and I have 8, almost.
And they'll be in their 40s in 2050. And that's what motivates me. What kind of world will they share with 9 billion others? A resource-constrained world because of what we've done. It has to be a livable world. So we have to be very smart now, and very smart urgently, to make it so.
Another question.
Hi, I'm Scott Chamberlain. Thank you so much for being here and for all of your work. Actually, you almost reached my question, which is we're hearing now that solar is reaching parity per kilowatt hour with the dirty fuels. Was that a huge source of optimism and of all these promises at Paris? And is that a huge source of optimism for you?
I wouldn't use the word optimism even in Paris. I mean, there was a humanity in Paris of realizing how bad it was for those most affected and least responsible. And that was the kind of justice issue and fairness issue. That was more the sense. There is a real sense now that we're into a period between now and 2020 when the text in Paris said nobody can go backwards. But the real point is everybody has to go forwards more rapidly and with more determination. And undoubtedly, the richest countries with most resilience and most capacity must go fastest of all. And they're not doing it. The NGOs, well, they're not doing it yet. The NGOs did an analysis of the 189 intended contributions. And they came out of it saying the poorest countries, the developing countries, are more ambitious, more concerned about going towards clean energy, but they require the investment. So there's a question mark. We will do X, but we do X plus Y if we get the investment, and that's where we want to go very, very strongly. And that the richer parts of the world still need to do more, including the United States, including Europe, Europe is kind of proud of itself because but actually, look at the lights in this room. Look at the food that we consume and waste. Look at the lifestyles we lead. I actually have a conversation with myself with these 5 grandchildren. I give them unnecessary presents. Why do I do that? I mean, with all the packaging of them. That's trees. I mean, there are little things we can do, lots of little things. And if every family would do those little things, if we could have woken up on the 1st of January and really understood we're in a new era of sustainable development. No country in the world is living sustainably. Costa Rica made it for about 100 days over the summer of 100% renewable energy. More power to Costa Rica. And Ethiopia has committed in 2027 because they have big hydro and they're going to do it. And it's not the richest countries that are committing as ambitiously as some of the poorer countries to go renewable energy totally. But we need to be out of fossil fuel completely by 2050, and we hopefully would be out of all fossil greenhouse gas emissions. Then we would have a wonderful, more equal, safer world, and we would still enjoy a very good lifestyle.
Question right here.
Thank you so much for being with us, and I'm just thrilled with all your knowledge and response and involvement. One of the epicenters in the world where your twin passions for human rights and environmental issues come together is the Middle East. Tom Friedman had an article or column this fall where he called the Middle East potentially unlivable. Some days the temperatures got up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit and they have major water issues. It's also a human rights disaster. With your quintessential optimism, do you have any good thoughts to share on that region?
Well, let me, first of all, bring down many scales my quintessential optimism. I would prefer what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said when we were on a panel together, about 3 or 4 years ago in New York. And we were in front of a crowd of young people involved in social media. And when Archbishop Tutu gets in front of young people, he gets very excited and very, expressive, and he's full of hope and goodness and all the rest of it. And there was an American journalist moderating the two of us, and she turned to him somewhat sharply and said, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, "Oh no," he said, "I'm not an optimist, dearie." He called her dearie. "No, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And I am a prisoner of hope, and I mean that because there are reasons sometimes where it's hard to hope. But hope gives you energy. Hope is seeing a little bit in the glass, not maybe half full, but that bit that you work with. And I think that's a really important way of trying to tackle these problems. And I think the reality is that we are in a transition at the moment. And if we took seriously what our governments agreed in September and in December with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, we ought to be thinking differently. Universities ought to be thinking, primary schools ought to be thinking, women's groups ought to be thinking, youth groups ought to be thinking. We all ought to be thinking through how can we make a contribution. I gave an example this morning because it was, an example that impressed me quite a few years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a Million Women project in Australia. And this was a project of, I can't call them ordinary women because they were actually extraordinary women that they had this project, that they would try in their own life to reduce their carbon budget, and by doing that, if they got 1 million women to agree, reduce the budget of Australia, because they were very worried that Australia is very vulnerable to climate and wasn't good on climate change. An extraordinarily interesting idea of women power. They had the last time I was talking to them, they had 85,000 members signed up. Housewives, professors, journalists, all saying, I can do more in my little neck of the woods about this. That's what we need. That's actually what we need. And I think if you Google the 1 million project, I think it comes up. I think it's still active, And,
we have time for one last question. Jen?
Thanks. My name is John Nader. First of all, thank you, Mrs. Robinson, for coming into the Pacific Council, for having us all. I'm a transactional attorney, and I'm still short in the tooth, but one thing I have increasingly learned in my career is the rhetorical power of just making an argument sometimes. If you at least present some evidence, it shames the other person, the other party, if they're not able to marshal some sort of answer into at least giving you some of what you need. But the deals that I negotiate on are this compared to geopolitics, and I was heartened, or at least intrigued, to hear that on a global scale, that was even the case, that in Paris, stories from the Marshall Islands or other countries who have the most at stake in climate change, that I'm interested to hear, if I understood you correctly, that retelling their stories even had a rhetorical effect on diplomats and ambassadors from the most powerful countries in the world. I wanted to hear more about that, and if I did understand you correctly there.
You did understand me correctly, and it was very, very moving. There was a group of vulnerable countries called the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which I spent a lot of time with, and they were gathering together, and they were determined to be in every room and everything and tell the stories of just how serious it was for them. And, you know, there is an innate sense of fairness in people. And when you get to a certain stage, something becomes so unfair. And we got a better climate agreement because of the stories that people were hearing, because of the real life experience of so many people. And there was a real sense at the end of, when the gong was gonged by Laurent Fabius, the foreign minister of France, the emotion in the room. I mean, people were crying. I was crying. I mean, people were literally crying with emotion of what this meant, because somehow this text is not a strong text, it's not an enforceable text, it's not, you know, a text that you could be totally proud of, but it's a fair text, because it understood that nobody should be left behind. And if you say well below 2 degrees and striving for 1.5 degrees, if you put the goal of carbon neutrality before the end of the century, it should be by 2050, but before the end of the century is at least something. And if you know that you have 189 countries that have committed to what is not enough, but it's a realistic starting point, and that we have to be more ambitious, putting all that together was quite extraordinarily moving and energizing. I mean, I came out of Paris incredibly energized that we really now have to do whatever it takes, because we're talking about future generations. We're talking about children and grandchildren. We're talking about every child born who will live through all this cycle for the next 100 years, and who have to have a livable world. And it is very doable. And I think what was very encouraging, there were 2 constituencies that were very notable in Paris. One was business, not the fossil fuel industry, I have to say, but all other business. There were CEOs and business leaders who were in Paris for 9 days, and every single day there was a major business engagement, major business meeting, and it was all under the common flag of We Mean Business, but it included a whole lot of business organizations. And the other one was civil society. The civil society realizing we can now engage with the 189 countries who've made their commitments, try and encourage them, make them real, help developing countries to strategize more, to help. And what we need is a global solidarity. I sometimes use the metaphor, or whatever you'd call it, of the Titanic. You know, when the Titanic was facing that iceberg and hit that iceberg, it wasn't just those down below in steerage who died. It was first-class passengers. And we're kind of in that thing, where at the moment it's the poorest who are most affected and dislocated and buffeted and hurt very significantly by climate change, and their countries are hurt. Bangladesh and the Philippines pay a huge amount of their annual GDP to compensate for these huge cyclones that are now aggravated by climate change and worse than they've ever known. They've been used to cyclones. They're very adaptive to them, but they've never known anything like what they're getting now, because it's aggravated. The water is warmer, and it's worse. And so these are what is happening to countries. And so it's a mixture of really understanding those stories and having a human solidarity to deal with them. Certainly Paris for me was a very high moment in my experience, to be honest, a very emotional moment. We now have to build on it and get people to internalize that we're in a new era of sustainable development. And what does that mean for me, for my family, for my community, for my firm, for my workplace, for, and that's the real message.
Well, I think one of the high points for the Pacific Council is having Mary Robinson come here and address us all.
Thank you very much.
Mary, I have a book I'm going to give your husband that's just come out about a fabulous story about water savings in the desert. I think you will enjoy it, by Seth Siegel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bob?
I met Seth earlier. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I now have and having listened to the remarks for the last 45 minutes, I was just going to say the honor, but the high honor of helping to bestow an award that means a great deal to the Pacific Council, the Warren Christopher Public Service Award. Former U.S. Secretary of State Warren Christopher was an early supporter of the Pacific Council. He was a longtime member of our board of directors and even longer served as co-chairman of the Pacific Council. I think, as you all know, he was a devoted public servant, dedicated to his community, his country, and to a just world. The Christopher Award seeks to honor his life and legacy. And the award is presented to someone who demonstrates commitment to international domestic affairs, to the highest ethical standards, to the promotion of the common good, to equality and fairness, and to government service as a noble pursuit. Something we could probably do better at right now in the United States. The Board of Directors of the Pacific Council and the Christopher family selected Mrs. Robinson based on her accomplishments and commitments during a wide and varied career of public service. From the beginning of her career, as you've heard tonight, she has been a dedicated human rights advocate, standing up for those most in need and without a voice, a champion for the rights of women and children around the world. I'd just like to add that you heard that she was Commissioner of Human Rights, but when she took over that office, it was almost an invisible agency, and when she left it, it was a renowned and effective body. And Dr. Lauren has talked far more eloquently about the other positions she held than I ever could, but it's clear that her public service has had a far-reaching impact around the world. So, the Christopher family and the Pacific Council are pleased to present Mary Robinson the Warren Christopher Public Service Award. And as we do that, I would like my good friend Scott Christopher to join me in presenting the award. Scott?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your very kind words. Thank you.
This concludes our program. Mrs. Robinson, thank you so much.
May I?
Oh, please.
May I just-
Thank you.
I-
Absolutely. I don't want to mock you.
I promise to be very brief, but this actually means a great deal to me because I knew Warren Christopher. I can't say we were very good friends or anything, but I met him on a number of occasions, and he impressed me as the ultimate person who served the public well in governmental office as Secretary of State of the United States. He just knew in a very particular way what it meant to have the honor to serve. And that's leadership. It's a leadership of service. And he really showed what that meant. He was always modest about himself, almost understating. But you knew that there was an integrity there that was quite incredible. And I am very honored to receive this award. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.